I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Kris Bowers, composer for King Richard. Kris, you've reunited with director Ronaldo Green, who you worked with on Monsters and Men. What do you most value about working with him?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Ray and I worked together. I guess I was maybe even 6 years or so ago on Monsters and Men, and I feel like we got incredibly close working on that. Not only as friends, but also creatively. Just the way that we ended up working was he was in New York, and I went out there for a decent amount of time and spent time working with him on a daily basis, kind of setting up a studio with him in the room. And same here in LA, he came out here and we spent some time together, and we just kind of created a pretty easeful way of communicating and really a huge sense of trust, which I feel like is one of the toughest things to uh, uh, develop with a collaborator. It can be a really tough thing to develop with a collaborator. And so when you've spent that time to build a trust to the level that we had, um, once we worked on a project like this, it was really nice to just kind of fall back into that and have that secondhand communication with each other.
Isn't it true that with composers, particularly if you don't have that space where you can really kind of shine or fly and just do things that are maybe a slightly outside of the comfort zone, then you're not going to, you don't have the same, I guess, creativity. Like, for example, when you're a costume designer, a production designer, you're working in pre-production, you're working throughout the production. Composers generally usually come towards the end. Is it challenging when you don't have that relationship with the director to do something kind of special, or do you find that it just depends on the film?
It really depends on the director or how you guys interact with one another. I mean, it's all, interpersonal dynamics. And I feel like there's so many times where the director is trusting you with their creative baby in so many ways. And so they're also trusting each of their department heads to be able to translate any sort of emotional idea that they have into that craft, into that medium. And I feel like that can be a scary thing for a director, especially depending on where they are or what this piece means to them or any of those things. And so as they're sharing this space with each of us and asking us to contribute in very specific emotional ways, I feel like it takes a lot for them to be able to just trust somebody they don't really know. And so building that trust quickly really depends on how much how that communication feels, how comfortable we feel with one another. But it's the same as building any sort of dynamic with like a new person that you're meeting, and trying to develop some
Yeah,
sort of friendship essentially.
yeah. Let's drill down a little into some of the tracks on this score. I love scores that mix ambient and percussive sounds, and so, because sometimes it can really not work. In this film, it certainly does. It's very ambitious in how it layers a number of complementary sounds and rhythms. And a great example is the plan. It's very evocative and immersive. And it's a great score to listen to with headphones because of the way that you are able to kind of mix it. Can you talk us through mixing ambient and percussive sounds and why you went in that direction for this film?
Yeah, I think I decided pretty early on to limit the palette to something that felt like it could relate to not only the sport of tennis, but also the way that the film felt. And so, and how we could, have those things represent both this family and also Venus and Serena themselves, and how much of a force they were when they came into the game and how much they changed the way that the sport felt in so many different ways. And so pretty early on, I limited it to just strings, harp, piano, prepared piano, and percussion, and wanting to be really specific and intentional with how those things are used, especially the percussion and prepared piano. Just making sure that the percussion comes in moments where you really see these young women step into their power and really play the game in a very forceful way that we hadn't really seen before. And then the prepared piano is kind of a light version of that that's palpable throughout so much of the story. And those sounds kind of coming together, I think, made me feel like there was enough room to then have a little bit of synthetic element to give a bit of ambiance to the whole sound of the score.
Let's talk about how you mix electronic and ambient together with orchestral sounds. It's a lot of composers these days have gone in that direction, but honestly, sometimes it doesn't feel organic and it feels strange, which maybe might work for the film. In this instance, I think it's extremely effective because you're going for something a bit more ambitious. Can you talk us through the fusing of orchestral and electronic, and whether or not you have to emphasize one over the other depending on what is happening in the scene?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like because so much of the story is about the heart and warmth of this family dynamic and the support that these parents are showing their kids, and the heart of these young girls. So I feel like the focus was really on that feeling, which will, for me at least, come from something that feels organic, even if it is ultimately something that's synthetic as far as the instrumentation. But I always like something, especially for this score, that feels like it's a little unplaceable, whether or not it's organic or electronic. And so because of that, I feel like the organic elements are leading a bit more, just because they're anything electronic is really just to emphasize what's organic and to kind of like create a bit of a like texture around it. But there are a couple of moments, like the moment where he's trying to find these gang members and kind of searching the city, or the moment later in the final match where there are some electronic elements that become even more palpable, and those are like in these moments of tension in the film. But for the most part, the organic is always leading.
Yeah, and then there are great tracks like Hitting and Practice, where the score is quite propulsive, and to me it sounded quite charged, and I think which was quite fitting for scoring the sporty side of the film. And you mentioned the tennis element. You could have gone in a really kind of, to be honest, cliched way and just kind of done something that was a bit back and forth, like the tennis match, but you didn't do that, thank God. So can you talk us through the challenges of trying to score for a sport film or scenes that involve sport without going down a cliched route, because it could have happened?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest reasons why it didn't happen is, obviously not only following Resurrection, but Pam Martin, the editor, had already cut these matches in a way that felt so clear what the arc of the game was. And it's pretty fascinating that there's no commentary at all in any of the games. And so the only way how the game is going is by the reactions, or how the game feels pace wise and all of that. And so noticing how she was changing the pace of the hitting in certain moments, and how when she chose to slow things down, it really made it very clear how the music should be supporting those things, and where we should be landing emotionally. And so having these very specific points where we knew there was a shift here, and when this point is lost or won, there's a big shift that needs to happen there tonally. And when she has this look with her father, this needs to happen. And so looking more for these emotional beats that happen within the way that Pam cut those matches kind of gave these pillars that I can focus on. And then otherwise, rhythmically, always wanting to have something that felt as unpredictable as the game is when you watch it play. Because what I always find fascinating about tennis is that, like you said, yeah, it is this back and forth, but the rhythm is always there's so much syncopation to the rhythm because of how much they're trying to knock the other off balance, right? Like anytime that there's this predictable rhythm, pretty soon somebody's going to do something that kind of changes that and creates a different kind of like almost like an odd bar essentially in my mind. And so I think that made it so that I wanted to approach so many of those sections where there's a lot of those sections are in 5 or in these odd time signatures, just because to me it felt more fun to have something that felt rhythmically unpredictable. And even if it might be in 5, it also there are constant syncopations and ways that I'm trying to throw it off so we don't really know where the downbeat is, essentially, just because that's how the game feels as it's being played. So I feel like creating those pillars and then finding some sort of way to create a motor that feels as undulating as the game is, and then following that emotional map was the way that those things kind of came together.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I just think, to me, it just sounds like way more challenging than perhaps you're even giving credit for. It's really quite effective. My final question is about how a lot of your most well-known work is on projects that focus on the experience of people of color against against a more general backdrop of society at large, like Green Book and Bridgerton and Dear White People and When They See Us, Billie Holiday, and now King Richard. Obviously, you're attracted to telling those kinds of stories from a personal perspective, but have you found that you do get attracted to that kind of story when you're looking for your next project?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, it happens to be the projects being made by the filmmakers that I'm lucky to like partner with often, just because that's what's also that's what's important to all of us. So I feel like working with Ray or working with Ava DuVernay or Justin Simeon, those kinds of projects are projects that that they're passionate about, and then I always feel fortunate that they look at me as a collaborator that they want to continue to work with. And ultimately, yeah, it is a big thing. I think the thing that I love about all these stories is that they're human stories above anything else, right? And so I think that when you look at a story like King Richard, it was very personally moving for me, just looking at these Black parents and what it took for them to be able to give their kids the lifestyle that they could have. It just reminded me of my own parents, or also just any parent in general that's in that position. So many Black parents that for their children to be successful did everything that they could to make that possible, even whatever they had to sacrifice themselves. And so I feel like me thinking about how my parents did that for me, and my parents actually decided they wanted me to play piano before I was born, and they found teachers all around the city, and they didn't go to college themselves. Like they put everything that they could into me being a musician, and now being at the age where I can look at that from a different perspective and start to think about the idea of being a parent and what that must have taken me. I just feel like I was in a very specific place working on this film, thinking about how I could really empathize with Richard and Oracene and what they were doing for their kids, and also at the same time feel this great sense of appreciation for any parent that does that for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key to this film, and I think that's probably why people are going to really gravitate towards it. Kris, thank you so much for your time today. We'll bring you back shortly for our group panel chat.
Sure, appreciate it.